As the dray wagon carrying the coffin slowly made its way across the prairie, the procession of a few became a progression of many. A journey that had begun in tragedy over a century ago was about to come full circle. Sintkala Nuni, the lost bird, was coming home to Wounded Knee.
Funding for Lost Bird of Wounded Knee is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through the Central Educational Network.
Sintkala Nuni's journey began at a time of turmoil. By the late 19th century, the Indians of the northern plains had seen their way of life obliterated. Forced onto reservations and starving, many had turned to the spiritual world for redemption.
Who would have thought that dancing could have made such trouble? We had no wish to make trouble, nor did we cause it of ourselves. We had no thought of fighting. We danced in a circle, hand in hand. The message I brought was peace. Short Bull, Ghost Dance Leader, 1906.
A new religious practice, the spirit dance, was becoming popular among certain tribes. Known to whites as the ghost dance, the ceremony was a prayer of renewal for a desperate people.
Our dead relatives were going to come back again, and we would see them. The onslaught or the coming of the whites would be stopped, that they would leave. The buffalo would come back, meaning that our culture, our way of life, our lands, and our freedom would come back.
The Lakota were ghost dancing, and there was a total misunderstanding about the ghost dance. And the media was involved in that fear, in that they wrote things that made it seem worse than it was. You know, the headlines were blood and guts, and the Indians were going to attack.
Sensational newspaper headlines declared Indian uprisings. Settlers were afraid. General Custer's defeat 14 years earlier left lasting memories. The government responded by calling for the arrest of ghost dance leaders. On December 15, 1890, the Sioux chief Sitting Bull was assassinated during his arrest at the Standing Rock Reservation. His followers fled to the Cheyenne River Reservation for protection and to warn another leader, Chief Bigfoot, of danger. At the Pine Ridge Reservation, Chief Red Cloud invited Bigfoot and his band to meet to discuss the situation. The next morning, Chief Bigfoot and over 350 men, women, and children began the cold winter trek to Pine Ridge. They never arrived. On December 28th, the U.S. cavalry intercepted them at Wounded Knee Creek. Bigfoot's followers were now prisoners.
All night, they tortured us by gunpoint. They asked us who was in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the battle with Custer. Were you there? We told them we don't know. They were saying things to us in English, but we can't tell them what we don't know. Iron Hail, Wounded Knee survivor.
The next morning, the men were forced into a group surrounded and disarmed. It's not clear who fired the first shot, but a bloodbath followed.
I heard the first shot coming from the center, followed by rifles going off all over. Occasionally, a big boom came from the big gun on wheels. The Lakota were all disarmed, so all they could do is scatter in all directions. Alice Ghost Horse, Wounded Knee survivor.
At the first volley we fired, there were about 20 or 30 Indians dropped, and we kept it up until we cleared out the whole band. Private Eugene Caldwell, 7th Cavalry.
Some of them died right away, but some didn't die right away, so they laid kicking and rolling in their own blood until they died. And then the guns were turned on the women and the children, and they were shot.
When the smoke cleared, the Army had 25 dead and 39 wounded. Over 150 Indians lay dead, including Chief Bigfoot, but that same number had crawled away injured and died. The massacre ended by midday and soldiers left to avoid an oncoming blizzard. Wounded Knee would lie in icy silence for the next 4 days.
The nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer. The sacred tree is dead. Black Elk, Oglala Holy Man.
We feared that some of the Indian wounded might have been left on the field, and a number of us volunteered to go see. I was placed in charge of the expedition. All this was a severe ordeal for one who had so lately put all his faith in the Christian love and lofty ideals of the white man. Dr. Charles Eastman, January 1st, 1891.
When the blizzard ended, the Army began burying the frozen, distorted bodies. While taking a break from their grim task, Dr. Eastman and his men heard a sound which they first thought was a deer. They followed the sound to the frozen body of a Lakota woman.
She was frozen to the ground in her own blood. Underneath her body was an infant, about 6, 7, 8 months old. And she was still crying. It was a weak little cry.
The child had survived the ravages of both man and nature. She was taken to Pine Ridge, frostbitten but alive. For the next 2 weeks, the baby was given 4 different names: baptized, stolen from tribal members, retrieved, and stolen again until one man carried her home as his prize.
He is the beau ideal of the citizen soldier. Such men make the position of a guardsman full of honor, while serving as a constant example to be followed. Trooper William R. Hamilton.
Brigadier General Leonard Wright Colby, born of a long line of military heroes, was the 44-year-old commander of the Nebraska National Guard. He and his troops arrived a week after the massacre to protect the Nebraska border.
He pictured himself as a daring, courageous Civil War hero. He took that child, actually, as a trophy of war.
Over the next 2 weeks, General Colby, through a series of tricks and bartering, obtained his prize, Zintgala Nuni, the lost bird. He took her home to Beatrice, Nebraska, and legally adopted her before telling his wife.
She was optimistic to the extreme, and her aspirations lifted her into an ideality and exaltation. Reverend Olympia Brown.
44-year-old Clara Colby was a woman ahead of her time. A close associate of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she had been among the first graduating class of women at the University of Wisconsin. She was an educator, lecturer, and editor of the suffragist newspaper, the Women's Tribune, a position that kept her in Washington, D.C. for 6 months every year. It was there she learned of the new addition to her family.
She helped homeless people. She took care of, everyone. She would give you the shirt off her back. She was a selfless person. So at that time, there was no telephone, so they sent a wire. 2 weeks later, he sent a wire saying, "Come home. You're the mother of a young Indian baby." Wow, Clara was shocked. She did go back, and she just fell in love with the child.
Although the news of the new baby caught Clara off guard, she loved her husband and in May returned to Beatrice, enthusiastically taking over the care of her new daughter.
The Indian must go, is going, and will soon be gone. It is his luck. Major William Shepard, 1884.
Taking Indian children from reservations has been common throughout our history.
The idea was that if those young children were adopted into white homes, that they would stand a better chance in growing up. That growing up on the reservation in poverty and all those kinds of things that was going to be detrimental to the children, and so their best chance would be to be raised in a white family and assimilated into white society. And it was during a time when there was many policies of assimilation going on across the country, the boarding schools, relocation programs, and things like that. The general philosophy at that time was that assimilation was the best thing for Indian people.
During most of the 20th century, tens of thousands of Indian children were adopted by white families or placed in boarding schools.
It was done with good intentions, I believe, that these children were going to be better off in some way by being able to blend in and become part of mainstream society. Nobody really understood how important it was to people to be a member of their own society and to maintain those values and those traditions, and how much that history and culture and spirituality, how much that is a part of who a person is.
The little dusky maid, although a full-blood Indian of the most warlike and uncivilized race, seems to take kindly to all the favors of civilization. Clara Colby, 1891.
Her dream, I think, for Lost Bird was to have a better life than she had. Adoptive parents, they want their child to have their ideals, their values, in other words. So she taught her what she had been taught, hoping that she would be like her, She devoted herself to the child.
In June of 1891, Brigadier General Leonard Colby was appointed to Assistant Attorney General of the United States. The family moved from the dusty frontier town of Beatrice to the gay 90s whirl of Washington, D.C.
They were wined and dined, even in the White House, because they were friends with Harrison. There was this banter, this political banter and intellectual banter going on during these receptions. And Lost Bird was there, walking around. She was sick a lot of the time. And she got everything that came along. She'd get the flu, she'd get colds, pneumonia. She didn't have any immunity to them.
While Zintka suffered physically from her lack of immunities in the white world, Clara suffered unkind comments from fellow suffragists. Inside the movement, a great deal of racism smoldered, and many thought Mrs. Colby was losing focus. Clara was undaunted. She dearly loved Zintka, lavished her with gifts, and took her on worldwide travels. Suddenly, in 1893, Zintka's governess, Maud Mueller, announced she was pregnant. Clara had planned to help Maud care for her child.
Until she found out that it was her husband's child. So she was her husband's mistress.
The couple separated. Leonard moved back to Beatrice with his mistress. Clara and Zintka stayed in Washington.
By holy and religiously law, I marry this Indian to this squaw. Sober live and sober proceed, and bring up your Indian breed. Popular skipping song of the 1890s.
In the 1890s, blacks and other minorities lived as servants in the back alleys of Washington. It was to here that Lost Bird was drawn. She grew disobedient at home, sneaking away to an accepting world of laughter and uplifting songs. This did not bode well with Clara, who wanted her child to identify with white people. Zintka was confused. She was not to play with Negro children, but she could see that her skin was nearly as brown as theirs. Zintka began to wonder exactly who she was. Her illnesses continued. So did Lost Bird's curiosity. Clara had kept Zintka's Indian belongings, her cap, moccasins, and bracelet. Zintka had always loved handling them, but now she began to ask more detailed questions about them. Questions Clara could not answer.
When she was about 10 years old, they went to an exhibit, some kind of exhibit where there was a group of Lakota dancers dancing there, back east. And Zintka started watching these dancers and listening to the drum beat, and She was so taken with this, and it was time to go, and Clara could not get her away from that group. She just wanted to be there and listen to them. It was something that was in her.
Lost Bird's lifelong struggle to repair the severed bonds of her heritage had begun.
The pitiful story, her dead mother, seems to appeal to her just now, and this mother stands to her for freedom, while I represent the power that compels and constrains her. It is pitiful for us both. Clara Colby, 1902.
Clara tried to help her troubled daughter.
She tried putting her in different schools, boarding schools. The girl would act out. She was basically going crazy. And so was Clara, who was trying to she didn't know how to help her daughter.
If the child has gotten the message that it's not okay to be who they really are, that who they need to be is part of this family they've been adopted into, and yet they know deep down that they don't feel the same, what they can come to do is to hate that part of themselves.
Disruptive behavior and running away are common problems faced by white families with adopted Indian children.
They're searching for the roots, who they are. They know who they feel who they are, but they have to find that, their families, their identity, their spirituality, and just trying to find out that they really are who they know they are.
Whether living in Washington with Clara or in Beatrice with Leonard, Zintka ran away at every chance. Her dark skin and unladylike ways made her a nuisance to relatives who would taunt her, a father who would beat her, and two worlds that would not accept her. Clara and Zintka moved to Portland, Oregon. It was at age 16, while living at nearby Chemawa boarding school, that the Lost Bird flew, running away to South Dakota. Zintka joined a Wild West show, soon earning enough money to visit the Standing Rock Reservation in search of her family. She was not well received.
She looked like a full-blood Indian woman, but she was totally white in the way she came across. Very assertive, as her mother had taught her to be. And so she wasn't demure. She didn't sit, very quietly and be like an Indian woman. And she put off people. People didn't like to see it. They thought she was ruined. So, she had a tough time communicating with Indian people. She could communicate with white people, but not with Indians. Yet she wanted to.
She then went to Pine Ridge and to Wounded Knee. There, she lay down on top of the mass grave, arms outstretched, and cried.
Dear Leonard, I love and pity her. There is much prejudice against the Indian here. I was in terror for fear she would get into serious trouble. Clara Colby, 1907.
Zintka had returned to Portland only to face more racism. Clara, in desperation, now sent her to live with her father in Beatrice. Leonard had become a very wealthy man and could well afford to help her. He did not.
Zintka got pregnant, and he placed her in the Milford Industrial Home, which was about 2 hours from Beatrice. And what it was that it was a lockup facility for women that were pregnant, young ones that were pregnant. And Zintka did stay in there for a year, and she had her baby, and they say it was born dead. That Milford home was a pit. It was a horror place. The girls that did something wrong were taken by force up to a room at the top of the building, and they were straitjacketed, and they were tied up and left there. And in the summer it was so hot, and in the winter it was so cold.
After a year at Milford Industrial Home, Zintka returned to Portland to be with Clara and was quickly married. Her joy at being wed was soon replaced with horror. She had contracted syphilis from her new husband and split with him immediately. She remained an invalid for the next year. Zintka never found the happiness she was searching for.
She got married several times. She married an actor who beat her, and she left him.
Another trip to the reservation ended in more rejection. Attempts at acting in Hollywood resulted in inhumane treatment as an extra in silent movies.
And then she met a man who was a calliope player in the Sales-Floto circus.
Zintka and her new husband, Dick Allen, traveled for a short time with the circus, part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. By 1915, illness ended their touring. The couple and their 2 children now lived in squalor as vaudeville performers in San Francisco's Barbary Coast, a place where prostitution and disease ran rampant.
She was on stage since she was born. She learned to be on stage. That was the only thing that she could do.
Lost Bird, nearly blind and living in a seedy hotel room, did what she had to do to survive. Clara Colby died of pneumonia in 1915, loving her adopted daughter until the end. After World War I, an influenza epidemic swept across the country, killing 500,000 Americans. Zintka and her husband, both ravaged by illness, moved in with his family in Hanford, California. Influenza, compounded by syphilis, took her life on Valentine's Day. The lost bird would lie in a lonely grave far from her native land for more than 70 years.
We are not human beings on a spiritual journey. We are spiritual beings on a human journey. Stephen R. Covey.
Repatriation or reburial is just a bringing back of something that was taken. That could mean an article of clothing, a religious article of clothing. It could mean some personal belonging, a child.
Repatriation of items sacred to Native peoples has become a worldwide issue.
And recently we had the ghost shirt that was returned from Scotland. And one of the things that I really felt strongly about, and I told the people on the radio in England, the ghost shirt is sacred to us just as much as the Pope's clothing is to them. So to return it is very important. And you take a part of spirituality, a part of religion, and when you bring it back, it's making it whole.
In July 1991, a group of people led by Lakota spiritual leader Arvo Looking Horse traveled to Hanford, California to bring Lost Bird's remains home to Wounded Knee. What Zintkala Nuni struggled for so long to achieve in life, she would now accomplish in death. She was coming home.
As a mother, and as an aunt, and as a sister, and as a Lakota woman, if we needed to do these things to make a change so that we could continue to bring home what is ours, and to especially bring a lost bird home, we needed to do that.
You know, it was a combination of happiness and feeling very close to God, you know, and then terrible sadness and tragedy all at one time. And because you were remembering the massacre, but then you were remembering her life and how she had lived so far away from her people and had never come home and never found her people in life. And now in death, they were making sure that she was finding her home.
Everything on earth has a purpose, every disease and herb to cure it, and every person a mission. This is the Indian theory of existence. Mourning Dove, Salish.
In 1991, the Lost Bird Society was formed, inspired by the story of Zintkala Nuni. The society helps modern-day adopted Native Americans find their way home.
There are children out there who were taken just like Lost Bird was taken, and who have suffered and who have died out there, and who are continuing the fight to come back, just like she was wanting to find her own people and to come home. So it was to honor in her memory and to honor those who are trying to find the roots. And it's in honor of those who have made it home.
Today, when Marie's phone rings, it's often a modern-day lost bird searching for a connection.
To see them home, that's the greatest reward, I think. I've been able to trace, to find their families, to find out who they are, to find their families, and to call them back, and to reconnect them with their families.
Zintgala Nuni, the waif of Wounded Knee, the lost bird flies free now, her life both an omen and an inspiration, helping others mend the circle of life, bringing the center once again to the nation's hoop.
Funding for Lost Bird of Wounded Knee is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through the Central Educational Network.